we are going live now. Hi all, thanks for joining. We'll give a minute for others to join. We'll start at 7 o'clock. As we speak now, the people are joining. We still have a minute to go now. Good evening. We'll get started. Warm welcome to yet another webinar sponsored by PMI Ireland chapter. My name is Santosh Joshi. I am the Director of Events, and I'll be your host today. This webinar is being recorded for the future reference by the PMI Ireland chapter members. For your information, this webinar is one of the highest registered event of the year so far. That shows the interest that people have shown on the topic that is being discussed today in the webinar, and more importantly, the keen interest the people have shown to interact with the speaker. We are all looking forward for this event now. This webinar will examine the project performance measurement baseline components and how they all play together to enable today's project manager to determine the project status in much more timely and confident way. Your participation is very important in this webinar. You can use your chat box to ask questions to the speakers, to explain PMB, and to answer all our questions. We have an eminent speaker with us today. It is my pleasure to welcome Lee Lombard. He requires no introduction. A brief introduction, let me give it to you. Okay. He is recognized as one of the only 70 PMI fellows. And also, he is the founder of PMP certification program. I'm sure the most of us here have done the PMP certification, and it is the time for us to know who is the founder of this PMP certification, and that is Lee Lombard. He is the recipient of PMI Distinguished Contribution Award. He was a member of PM Networks, PM Journal editorial review team for over a decade. Contributed as a SME for a PMI Ireland Value Management practice standard also. He's a frequent lecturer in a prestigious Washington. Received one of the PMI's highest honors for his groundbreaking applied learning programs.
Kein Code plus Zuschauer.
Let me mute all others and then you can unmute.
Entschuldigung, ich war nicht mute.
All right. All right. Hopefully, I'm audible now.
You just.
Okay, great. Lee, you can unmute yourself. Okay, great. All right. So just coming to the this one, right? I was introducing the Lee Lombard award. He was awarded as a professional development provider of the year 2007. He is author of 2 books and 32 professional papers. More than 50,000 students in 53 countries are following Lee. He's educated as a mechanical engineer, and he is a holder of master's certification in project management from George Washington University. It is an immense pleasure to welcome Lee Lombard, and the PMI Ireland chapter is proud to have him today with us. Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Santosh. I appreciate that very much. I always like to hear how those introductions go. Nothing's changed over the last couple of years because I've been doing what I'm doing now. And sometimes I reflect on all that and go like, wow, that must have been fun. I don't remember it all, but it's really been a pleasure to be so involved for over 44 years in the PMI organization and 55 years in project management. So it's pleased for me to bring this workshop to you tonight. This particular webinar, this is the first time it's been offered. I've been dallying around this performance measurement baseline for quite a while, trying to figure out if everybody really understands just how important it is. I've come to the conclusion they don't. And so I want to start seeing if I can enlighten them a little bit to be able to see that from a little bit better perspective. We'll take questions at the end, put them in the chat. I'll kind of keep track of that, but we'll try to make sure we leave enough time at the end to keep those questions answered for you. I appreciate the time that you take to think about them and ask them. So hopefully we'll get everybody questions answered. All right, Santosh, you want to move that up to that first slide I have?
Sure. Lee, you're able to see it now?
No, I don't have control.
Yeah. So I'm moving the slide. Hopefully you can see it now.
No.
Oh, no. Okay, let me see.
There you go. You want to go ahead and start that slideshow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
All right, very good. Now, here's what I'm going to do so you know what to expect. I'm going to basically go through the life cycle of a project when it comes to this idea of a performance measurement baseline. And what I've found over the past few years, especially, which has really kind of shocked me, is that we don't talk much about the performance measurement baseline, but we talk even less about the charter and what role it plays. So I wanted to start off today with this slide about the charter. And what I've determined is that one of the reasons we have variances in our projects, either cost variances or time variances, or even to some extent quality variances, is because we do a terrible job of expanding or isolating and interpreting the charter that's been prepared by senior level management. If you think back, some of you may go back to 1996 when we issued the first PMBOK, and in there we referred to this charter and how important it was and that it had to be done well because it sets the stage for everything else we do in the way of project management. And when I say that, by the way, project management, what I mean is, as decision makers, we're people. We're not project managers. We're people. And we make decisions based on information that we have available to us. So our role as a decision maker is key to how well we've done in defining where that information comes from. So the charter plays a huge role. So what I tell my project people is that if you're given a charter by senior level management, and you got to remember they pay the bills. I mean, they're the ones trying to get things done that improve their organization from a profitability or longevity standpoint. And so when they pass that down to you as a project manager, you have a very serious responsibility to go through that and start asking questions. Because if you look at most of the charters I've seen are 1 to 2 pages at the most. Some of them are only 1 or 2 paragraphs. And then you're expected to plan out in detail from start to finish your project. You need to plan it out so that you've thought of everything that needs to be done, define the time that it needs to be done, and all the things that go along with that based on 2 paragraphs that's been given to you by the senior level members of the organization. So you have a responsibility to ask questions. I tell my people, ask questions until somebody asks you to stop asking questions. And now you know you're on to something, because if they don't want to answer, it's probably they haven't thought about it themselves. So I think here's what I tell my people is that if we don't do a good job of this charter definition and clarification, we're fundamentally starting our projects behind schedule. We're already in the hole on our projects, and we haven't even started yet. So take it seriously. Now, driving you are the same people that wrote poorly defined charters because they're in a hurry. The sooner they get projects done, the sooner they realize the benefits that they were expecting. And so they on one hand, keep it poorly informed. On the other hand, want you to do it fast. So we've got a real tight wire to walk here. And the project manager has to be the bad person here to begin to ask these questions of clarification. And I think it's important that we recognize that. So the charter kicks this off. If I'm going to have a performance measurement baseline, I need to have a well-defined charter. Now let me define the baseline for you. What we're trying to establish with this performance measurement baseline, I almost laugh having to say this, is a baseline that lets us measure performance. Yeah, well, yeah, of course, that's what it is. But what it means is if I'm going to plan the project, the plan anticipates the way we expect to execute the project. So as we begin to execute the project and we begin to gather data that compares actuals to expectation or plan, wherever there's a delta, wherever there's a variance, we need to be sure that we as project people understand what that variance is saying. So if we're over cost, we have to understand, does that mean we've spent too much money? Does that mean we've gotten less work done for the amount of money we spent? There's a lot of variables you have to take into consideration. But the fact of the matter is, project management is about measuring actual performance against expectations of a performance. And we set standards, we set variance thresholds. And just rule of thumb is plus or minus 10%. And PMI says it's plus 10% minus 5% as a variable. So if you've got actual data that falls within the range of plus 10 minus 5, you don't have what we call a reportable variance. You need to understand what the variance is saying, but you don't have to use it in a formal reporting process. And I'll talk more about that as we get going through the program. But you've got to understand how important that variance tolerance threshold is. That's your flexibility in how you execute the project. All right, next slide, please. And in order to have that, then of course we know we got all these tools. I just want to spend a minute on this. I do a whole program on tools, and I think I want to make sure I remind you that the tools are there to help you create this baseline, create the project plan. The tools help you do that. The tools help you do it in a way that it has not all have to be done manually. Now, when I was your age, some of your age, back in my days with General Electric, I had tools too. Don't get me wrong. We've had tools forever. Now, my tool, the tool I used most as an engineer at General Electric was, well, everybody had it, but my tool of choice was paper and pencil. And so anything I had to do, if it required calculations, I'm doing it with calculations with a slide rule. Some of you don't even know what a slide rule is. And so we had those tools available. Now, what we've done over the last 30 or 40 years is had a constant improving of the availability of tools to help us create a better plan, a better project plan, a more realistic project plan. So the toolbox is full. It's getting more full every year. We add tool after tool after tool. And unfortunately, what's happened is we have so many tools now that we spend so much time learning how to use the tool that we never get around to using the tool. So I want you to really think about what tool adds value in creating this baseline. What tool is going to give me the most realistic information with the least amount of effort? So you've got to take a look at that and make sure that you understand what those things are. All right, next slide. So in order to do that, the first thing we have to do, again, give us the fact that the charter's been expanded and clarified. The first thing we have to do is define the work breakdown structure, the WBS. This is a term that's universal. The military service in the U.S. started the term back in the late 40s, early 50s, and it's been used ever since, and it's the centerpiece. It's literally the centerpiece of creating a performance measurement baseline. Because as you can see in this graphic, there's types of work packages. They're not all the same. All work packages aren't created equal in the eyes of God. They're different, and they have different purposes. Now, the present work packages are those work packages that cover the short-term duration. So if somebody said, it's time to start the project, well, then the present work packages, which would extend out a short period of time, because the farther out you go, the more variability there is, then you would look at that and say, those are the present authorized work packages. In fact, you can create, as part of this performance measurement system, a traceable way to keep track of who's charging the work package, whose time is being allocated against the work package. And if that time's not authorized, then they are charging the wrong account. Now, that doesn't sound like a big thing, but when I was at GE, we were doing a $300 million reactor project. Well, the fact of the matter is, at the end of each month, we could find up sometimes as much as $100,000 of bad charges to the wrong accounts. And most of the time it was errors, switching numbers from one direction to another. It was mostly those kinds of things, but occasionally you'd find somewhere people just didn't have a job that week and they just found a number and charged it. Well, if you don't find those and correct them, then you're going to run out of budget and funding before you have all the work done. So we want to have those authorized work packages, but they'll be shorter in term, in length, okay? Then we have the future work packages. Now, anything beyond the short-term authorized work packages will fall into the future planning work packages, we call them. And those basically say we're not going to define the work in excruciating detail. We're going to plan it in bigger packages of work in the out time frame, and then as we get closer to that time frame, when more information is available, then we'll reach out and pull some of that planning work packages in and convert them to authorized work packages. Now, just so you understand, this is really where the concept of Agile came from. This is what we call a rolling wave planning. It says we're only going to plan in detail for the short term, and then the longer term, we'll pull that in as we get closer to it. So this is basically the same philosophy that we have with Agile. When we have the sprints and we have the the scrums and the things that go along with it, and the retrospectives. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's basically the same thing, but they gave it some new terms. The people that met in Snowbird Ski Resort in 2001 to write the manifesto gave it their own terms. It's the same stuff. It's just a little bit different names that we use, okay? So those are the two main primary ones, but one of the most important ones are the completed work packages, those work packages that were done. Now in Agile, they call those, we look at those in retrospective. And what that basically means is learning curve. What we're doing is we're taking a look at the work package. We see what we plan to do. We compare that to what we actually did, and then we need to make a judgment call. Is that something I can anticipate to happen again on similar work, or was that an anomaly? And that we wouldn't want to include that in planning for the future. So you see, all we've done with all this is break it up into components that allow us to do a much better job of planning how long things will take, how much things will cost, what kinds of skill sets you need, and all the detail that goes into it that we never talk about anymore. I never hear anybody talking about, well, is that going to be a subject matter expert, or is that an entry-level person, or is that a mid-level? Because guess what? Each one of them bring a different technical skill to the table, but they also bring a different charge-out rate to the table. So we need to make sure that we plan the resources consistent with the work content, so that we're not paying more for someone that is not necessary to do that work. So that gives us the sequence of how all this work gets done. So now we have the detail of the work content, the scope. I think we like to call that scope. The scope of the work is defined. The kind of resources we need to use is defined. And so what's left now is the sequencing. How do we sequence that work? Because the performance measurement baseline covers from start to finish, but in a variety of work packages that have to be optimized as we move through time. All right, next slide, please. So what we do is we know we have a lot of data. Now here, I just want to point out to you, if the performance measurement baseline sets the standard for what you will measure performance against, or let's use the word progress, measure progress against, then you need to have a lot of different data capabilities so that when time comes, you're not just measuring total planned cost against actual executed cost, because within that comparison, there can be a tremendous number of varieties. So if, for example, if I want to look at what does that really mean, then I've got to look at what's the variance between resource allocation, numbers of person hours that have been executed and or planned, which drives out the amount of money based on the resource skill set. So we've got to measure the actual skill set charges against the skill set plan, and where there's a variance, need to understand it. We have to look at time, simply a time comparison. Where did we expect to be in time? Maybe it's milestones, maybe it's just passage of time, but where did we expect to be, and where are we? Now, if you start to look at that data, and let's say that we say, okay, well, we're behind schedule. We can see that. We have milestones we have not completed. Then if you're analyzing from a performance measurement perspective, first of all, you have to think, well, if we're behind schedule, then I would like to see some consistency in the data. And therefore, I would think that I would also see I'm underutilized in terms of personnel. In other words, I'm using less people. That would explain why I'm behind schedule. I can validate that one more time by looking at costs. So if I look at costs, I would expect costs to be behind, underrun. So if I look at this variance and I said the cost of the variance is schedule variance, but it's not a dangerous variance in that it's based on we haven't applied the resources, which means we haven't expended the money. So now when I look at the analysis, I can justify the variance and can look at the projection. So now the next issue is, okay, am I going to be able to increase the resource load? Am I going to be able to get more done in the next reporting period, which will then drive more costs based on pricing for the skill set capabilities? And so now the next reporting period, if it says I'm on schedule for milestones, then I hope that it says I'm on utilization of resources. I plan 22 resources to be utilized, and I'll be darned, 22 resources have been utilized, and those cost about the same amount of money. You can have small variations because of actual charge out rates. We use average charge out rates to plan, but the actuals are actuals for that individual. So you can get minor variances, but you need to be able to quantify those, okay? So what you're trying to do is create the kind of information that allows you to look intelligent. It allows you to think to yourself, hey, I can understand what's going on with this project. But unfortunately, we take too quick a look. We don't disintegrate the data, and we look at behind schedule, and we're suddenly saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're behind schedule. We're in trouble. It may not be true. You need to understand what the data says. Now, fortunately for you, and I never had this capability when I was actually working in the project management environment, but fortunately for you, there's unbelievable amount of data that's available now with the automated system capability that we have. So now you are in a position where you can decide what you want to measure. What do you want to measure? Do you want to break down resources to the next level, which is skill set type? Do you want to break it down to, well, you probably wouldn't want to do this, but male, female, gender? I mean, you can break it down to anything you want, basically. And if it's going to add value to you being able to understand and quantify variances, then that's what you want to do. And you need to do that based on the individual data that you've created with these work packages. Remember, each work package is fundamentally a mini project. It's got a start and it's got a finish. It's got a duration. It's got a resource load. It's got a price estimate. It has all the things that a full-blown project has. So each work package stands on its own from a planning perspective, okay? All right, next slide. So what we have to do once we have that kind of information is we have to create the sequencing. Now, what I mean by sequencing is what are the dependent relationships? For example, I did a job for Citicorp back in the, I think it was the early to mid 90s. And we did the work package definitions, and we had 1,100 work packages. That's a pretty big project. It was actually a $600 million a year, $600 million 3-year project. Okay, so we ended up with 1,100 Post-it notes. I always suggest you use Post-it notes to represent work packages because you can put all that information right on the Post-it note. Once you have all the Post-it notes defined, then you have to create the sequencing. And you have to determine what comes first, what comes second. What's an input, what's an output. And once you can look at the work package and say, okay, what what's an input to this work package? You look over some of the others, you say, well, X is an input and Z is an input and T is an input. So you line those up and show that all three of those are inputs into X, okay? So now X says, okay, once I have those three inputs, which enable me to do work associated with them, and my work is done, then I have to ask myself, where does my work go? So now what was an input has now become an output. And you do that for every single work breakdown structure element. Now, I always recommend you do the first one by hand with Post-it notes until you can have conversations. You can ask your peers, you can collaborate. Does this make sense? Is this where you see the flow? Do we need to move things around? Do we need to change the flow to represent more realistically how the work will be done? And you start having a lot of conversations, and before you know it, you start to define a reasonably good flow of work. What this ultimately becomes is your integrated logic network schedule that you will then put into a machine, a Microsoft project, or if you're rich, a Primavera. There's hundreds of them available. Microsoft project still owns about 70% of the world's market for project management software. And so you begin to use that by inputting the work breakdown structure defined in Flow into the Microsoft project software. Okay, once you have that defined and in, then you get to let the machine do what you learn. All of you that are PMPs, and if any of this is news to you, then I don't know how you pass your PMP, because this is old stuff relative to the PMP. But when I look at this and I've got the flow sequencing down, now I want to let the machine do a forward pass and a backward pass through all the legs of the schedule. Now, the machine knows how to do that. You can do it by hand to check yourself, but with 1,100 Post-it notes, I wouldn't suggest it. I wouldn't recommend it. But the fact of the matter is, when you do that forward pass, it gives you the duration of the project, okay? Now, our project for Citicorp, we were doing a mid-course evaluation. So we were 18 months in, we had 18 months to go. So we were doing the to-go effort. And so when we were done, we put it in the system, did a forward pass, and gave us a duration. Well, sadly, the duration was 36 months, which meant all the time we'd worked, the 18 months we'd already worked, we hadn't gotten anything done according to the machine. And so we had to try to reduce that. We tried to optimize the schedule to pull it in. That's one of the benefits of having an automated scheduling system, is you can begin to play what if games. What if we did this? What if we changed the workflow? What if we added more resources? That's what it was created for by DuPont back in the 50s, was what do we gain by throwing money at a project? And that's the same thing you can do. You can look at that and say, well, look, we got to squeeze 18 months out of the schedule. How can we do it? Well, if we double resources on the critical path, that's going to reduce the time. Well, it's going to over-reduce the time. It's going to move the critical path somewhere else. That's the beauty of an automated system. That's why it's so popular. And the people that use it and understand it and can make it, as I say, sing and dance, are worth their weight in gold, because they let you look extremely intelligent, because you can begin to optimize. If your schedule comes in 2 months later than you planned, then you can optimize. You can find ways to pull that in without having a dramatic effect on the project. Now, if you got to do 18 months like we did, it's not going to happen. We squeezed 6 months out, but we were still 12 months late. They ultimately canceled that project and wrote off $400 million. That was Citicorp, by the way. And so this is the usefulness of the tool. But as I do my investigations around the world, asking questions about how many of you have an automated, integrated logic network critical path schedule for your project. And when I ask that question, everybody's, yeah, we got that. We had that for a long time. I said, would you mind showing it to me? They said, no, not at all. We'll show it to you. So they show it to me. But unfortunately, what they have is a precedent diagram bar chart, which is better than nothing, no doubt about that. But it doesn't give you the visibility. It doesn't give you the clarity of what can be done to improve that schedule. So you need to take the time to create this schedule. Now, it's going to take upfront time. We haven't got a performance measurement baseline yet. It's going to take upfront time, and that's time management doesn't want to give you. So we have to justify it by confirming and defining what we're going to get out of it in terms of a performance measurement baseline. All right, next graphic, please. All right, during that process, we also then have to define what risks are associated with those work packages. Now, to me, I've said since I was just a little boy, and that was probably at birth, I've said for a long time that risk management is one of the key elements of being able to keep projects done on a timely basis. If we don't do an effective job of risk assessment by work package, then we're going to run into problems within the execution of the project that are going to have the ripple effect. And that's why I use the dominoes as an example. I'm sure most of you as children played the game with the dominoes, where you'd line them up and curve them and move them around until finally you get done and you push the first domino and it ripples through the entire line and knocks every single domino down. Well, you need to think about that as you begin to look at the risks and all the things that you planned in the definition of the work packages are the same things that could cause you problems. So if you want to look at let's say we compare the risk associated with getting the resource that we need. We need a subject matter expert to do this particular work package. It's very complex. It needs that level of skill set. If we don't get that skill set, it's going to have an impact on that work package. And it's going to mean that that work package may not get done, or the quality may not be what we expected, and therefore cause a variation in that work package, which, if you think about my domino ripple effect, that could ripple through the entire project. So we have to look at those risks very carefully. And there, to me, I don't feel like there's any small risk, because I think any risk can become a big risk on the project if we don't manage it appropriately. So it's not as though we can just focus on the big things that we think may happen, and then don't worry about the others. Now, unfortunately, in project management, this is the approach that a lot of project managers take, is they only worry about the big risks. The risks that they can see could be devastating. The problem that they have is that those little risks can turn into big risks when they're not managed. So that's why the emphasis on the risk register and the risk definition and the risk analysis and the risk definition in terms of inputs and outputs and so on and so on. An effective risk manager is a hugely important individual. And so you need to be sure that you've invested the kind of effort in comparing the baseline with the actuals. So the baseline created by certain assumptions for risk may be different than the actual that occurred on that particular plan, and therefore you have a variance. So variance analysis is important. Variance analysis, we have to establish what the variance thresholds are when we create the baseline. We can't do that after the fact. We need to do it ahead of time so that when we begin to experience variances, we can take action. We don't wait till the variance is so big it can't be recovered. We look at the variance compared to the tolerance threshold that we have, and anything that stays within that variance, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to do a lot of work on it. But anything that I start to see a trend, like it's 5% variance this month and 8% variance next month. Well, I'm pretty sure I can tell where that third month's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and take action, anticipating that third month. That's how we use these things. And that's why people say, I don't have time for that. Because it takes time. It takes time. These things aren't easy. If they were easy, they wouldn't be paying you the big bucks. I mean, they're not easy. They're hard. And they need to be done extremely well if your projects are going to be finished on time and within budget and deliver a high quality product. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in terms of that process. All right, next slide, please. This is the answer to all of our troubles. So what we do is we establish a dashboard. That dashboard has built into it the performance measurement baseline. That green color that you see there is representative of the performance measurement baseline. And so we know that when we start a project, it's green. We haven't done anything yet. And so it's green. Everything is go. And this is built in the liking of a traffic signal. There's nothing secret about this. There's guys out selling dashboards, and in fact, your software systems will claim, hey, you can create your own dashboards. You can create dashboard for resources and dollars and quality. You can create a variety of dashboards, and our software will support that. So that's good. Remember I said having the right software is good. And right now, believe it or not, I do a lot of work with Chorus Systems. Now they're based out of Ireland. They've won a whole bunch of awards this year for being the best PPM for small to intermediate sized projects. And I've had every possible dry run given to me to look at what that can do. I don't sell Chorus Systems, but I do happen to think it's a very good system that you probably ought to look at among the others that you compare. Having it be right there in Dublin certainly has a big advantage. So we look at that and we say, okay, so we start the project, okay? And within the first month in many cases, sometimes you make it till the second, you compare actuals against plan. And what we find is that we're moving away from the actuals. And let's say it's that second month that you're at 8% variance. That color then moves to yellow. This is a cautionary measure that says you have a variance. It's not outside the boundaries yet, but it is a variance that you need to be aware of. What we're trying to do here with dashboards is decrease the amount of written variances. What happens with written variances is they inundate you, they swamp you with the requirement to create more and more and more data. So what we're trying to do is we say, look, we're not going to report data about every single little variance. We're not going to report variance until it breaks the threshold. So the yellow is a warning, just like the yellow light in a traffic signal is a warning, okay? And so if you're a driver, you're driving down the road. Now, I admit y'all drive on the wrong side of the road, so it'd be a problem for me. But you're driving down a road and a traffic signal turns yellow. Now, what do you do? What do you do? Well, you slow down. That's a warning to you that the light's going to turn red. It's going to turn red. And so you slow down. It's a safety issue, just like it is on projects. It's a safety issue. Except we get people in the business, as we do in drivers, and I'm one of them, sadly. My wife used to say, "You're a horrible driver." I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "Well, you run lights all the time." I said, "No, I don't." And just as I'm saying that, a light turns yellow, and what do? What do you think I do when a light turns yellow? I speed up. Of course I speed up. I step on the gas, cruise through that signal, okay? And my wife will say, see what I mean? See what I mean? You ran that light. I said, no, I didn't. It was a long yellow. So I had time to get through there. Well, the reason I use that analogy is that's the way we think. We keep going on the project. We don't report the project red, because we say to ourselves, no, that's a long yellow. We can get through this without having to report. So project managers need to understand, when that dashboard turns yellow, you got to be prepared. You got to be prepared. So your dashboard is an important piece. It sets you up for the process to be able to report against your baseline in a way that's now under change control. Now, didn't really emphasize this. I didn't want to get a whole discussion about change control. But the reason I established tolerance thresholds is that we identify when we possibly may have a change. In order to make those kinds of changes, we have to revisit the baseline and be sure that we can make those changes without changing the scope, without changing the cost, or without getting the proper approval. So the change management idea is extremely important. We don't just get to change the baseline for the heck of it. We change the baseline when it gets approved, when it appears that there's no alternative. So the baseline is a constant. Now we can stack change on change on change, but we want to maintain traceability for that particular product. All right, I got one more slide, and then we're going to see if we can take some time to have a few questions, if you don't mind. Next slide is the rubber plan. Now, this was beaten into me by General Electric. I mean, almost literally beaten into me. Once you have an authorized baseline and it's placed under change control, you don't make variances go away by changing the baseline. That's what we call a rubber baseline. If I don't want to report variances, all I really need to do is set the baseline equal to the actual, and now my variances just go away. They're not there anymore. So when you see a project that people aren't reporting on, that they're saying, no, I'm right on target, I'm dead on this project, gosh, what's the word? They're lying to you. They're changing something to make that variance go away. My view is this: if you ever have a project that doesn't have a variance after 3 months, I actually say 2, but I'll give you the benefit of 1. After 3 months, the reality is not being represented. There's something going on that you need to investigate. That's your role, getting to the bottom of what's going on. So if you don't have variances, something's going on, and your job is to analyze it. One of my jobs at IBM was to analyze projects that had no variances. Now, before I got there, people that were doing that, senior level people, were looked at as heroes. Well, this guy's 4, 5, 6 months into the project. He has absolutely no variances. Well, they hired me to investigate there. And what we found is starting in month 2 and for sure in month 3, he was covering up variances by extending the baseline, by creating a rubber baseline, which is literally illegal under a change control system. So using the baseline to manage changes is one of the primary purposes of the performance measurement baseline. And understanding that will be key to your ability to look like a brilliant project manager who has the answers to what's going on your project. Not what you can represent by what the data says, but what really is going on from a standpoint of not only the past, but now I can take that performance indice and prove and move that, predict that into the future to see what the future is going to look like based on the past. This is something we do with the baseline. We predict the future based on the past. And last little stain, and then I'm going to give you time for questions. I have a saying that I always use when we talk about prediction and baseline control. In your project management process, whatever happened in the past will continue to happen in the future unless someone does something about it. And the project manager is the one to do something about it. Make corrective action, make changes, incorporate changes into the baseline. If you don't, whatever happened in the past will continue to happen, and the past will get worse and worse and worse. So that's the idea behind that. Now, next slide, and then we'll have some questions. The next slide basically is my slide thanking you for taking the time out of your schedule. This is such an important issue. I'm actually doing this program now 3 or 4 times before the end of the year because other organizations have recognized how important this is. So that's what I've got to say on it. Again, I've given you a 2-day seminar in 1 hour, less than 1 hour, but I'm sure you must have questions. So let's take a look. Let's see what we've got in the way of questions.
Thanks, Lee. Hi all. You can unmute your mic and ask a question to the speaker. By the way, the first question is coming from Matt Dorman. Matt, would you like to proceed with your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering what the best kind of project management software would be.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Like I say, there's literally hundreds of them. PMI breaks it down. They've stopped doing it recently, but the last few years they've done estimates of the most productive, the most useful and efficient. And no matter what you do, Microsoft still comes up on the top of that list. It's a little bit complicated, but if you look at the idea behind the use of these automated tools, they are complex by definition. If they were simple, they wouldn't be able to do what we need them to do. So I would still recommend Microsoft. I think there's one called Open Work Plan. There's Primavera, but that's too expensive. But I think openly, if you look at it, and again, look at this one from Cora Systems right there in Ireland, a home-based organization. They have a tremendous following and have been recognized by Gartner and others for the quality of their particular package.
And just another question, do you think that people want to just manage resources or material also?
Yeah, I think the problem is in my view, we've made it too easy for some project managers. I think we should demand they manage the full scope of a project. They need to manage the resource hours and the skill set capabilities and the cost associated with it and all the things that go along with that to get a comprehensive integrated look. I've seen projects that have been reported on schedule, on budget for 2/3 of the length of the project until somebody started to dig into the detail and finds that they were in big trouble. So I think you need to get farther beyond just managing the resources. If nothing else, just manage resource skill set types. That'll give you some really valuable information.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Next question is coming from Deirdre McCarthy. It's a very interesting and a real life question. Deirdre, you can go ahead with your question.
Okay, thanks, Lee, for that very good presentation. My question is about the politics of reporting bad news. So often as a project manager, when you come in, you actually have an insight that maybe people who are already involved in a pre-existing project don't have. And there is an exercise of reporting bad news. What support do you think is required for the project manager in that situation?
Yeah, I think this year you're sort of preaching to the choir on this one, because I certainly ran into that at GE and later on at government contracts, is that they don't like bad news. It makes them look bad. If they're responsible for the project's not doing well, then that makes them look bad. So I used to say, jokingly, it turned out, is I used to say to my senior level management, usually it was at a VP level, a high level, I would basically say something like this: what do you want to know? Do you want to know the truth, or do you want to know what you want the truth to be? And that usually spurred a very interesting conversation, because what they would do typically, now this is a little CYA, I'll admit that, but what they would do typically is they would say, well, what's the difference? Tell me both pieces of the information so that I understand the difference. And the first time I'd do that, and they'd say, well, give me the one that looks good. And so then somebody goes, now, wait a minute. This data says it looks good, but I know for a fact there's some problems. And pretty soon the senior level guy realizes you can't hide this. You can only hide so long, and you can only count on getting transferred so many times. And so we would have that discussion. I would always start it out by saying, what do you want? You want the truth, or do you want what you want the truth to be? And that requires you to look at it in a way that you can realize and describe what the delta is. And basically what I'm planting the seed of accountability. Because now if the senior level person knows the difference, they're going to be held accountable ultimately. But it's a hard call. I'm completely understand your issue, but remember, my career's on the line too.
Yep, perfect. That explains it very well, and there's some ideas there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lee, this is Matt here again. You mentioned about projects being reported on, the percentage complete and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How would you look at kind of catching that early from the point of view of, let's say, actual hours versus percentage complete?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I hate percentage complete. I think it's too subjective.
Yeah.
I think it allows you to make variances go away by changing the percent complete. With that said, I think you still, even with the statusing technique is percent complete, if I'm the project manager, I still want to know the next level down. So if let's say, for example, I'm statusing 100% complete, and it's just a resource intensive project, okay, but I'm reporting 100% complete. Well, we know the makeup of that project is going to be a variety of skill sets. So I'm going to take that percent complete and I'm going to drop down to the next level. And I said, well, what I'd like is to get a percent complete on subject matter expert efforts, on senior level experts, and on beginning level. I want to get a percent complete on those subordinate levels. That starts to bring reality to it, because again, if a person has game the system with their percent complete, they'll start to worry that that subset's going to expose them. So once you do that a few times, you can actually almost stop doing that, because the person understands that they may, I hate this word, but they may get caught creating that. So I prefer the term milestone percent complete. So I want a milestone that has a value, and then I'm not going to give you any more percent complete till that milestone's done. That's the most realistic way to use percent complete.
Yeah, okay. Cheers.
Hi, this is Mohib. I have a few comments and question. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yep.
Hi, Lee. This is Mohib again from Wichita State. The
Oh my
tornado.
gosh. I see Wichita State. I get that all the time, don't I?
Yeah.
That's all right.
This is
Give
the-
it to me.
This is the 5th time I'm like attending your show from all over the world.
I
Not
know.
in Ireland. I hope I see you in Las Vegas in Global Summit.
Oh, you will, my friend. You will.
Okay. This kind of relates to your story of running the radar/YOLO light. This kind of brings a personal experience to me, and I can relate this to your predictive, agile, and risk management altogether. So when you are, as a project manager, running the YOLO light, you have to also see what is the risk of running the YOLO light. Is the other cars gonna come, or is someone screaming on your right hand side? So as a project manager, you really have to pay a very big notice and stay calm. That's my thought. And I
Okay, well,
share.
that's a good thought. Let me put it in perspective of me in my driving example. It's sort of linked to how many times have you gotten away with it. In other words, how many times have you taken that risk and nothing happened? So that's with me. My wife would keep saying, "You're gonna get in a wreck. You're gonna get in a wreck," and I'm saying, "No, I'm not," and flying right through. And so pretty soon I start to say to myself, well, hell, I'm going to go through that yellow light. I never get in a wreck. And the next thing you do, I'm in a wreck and I'm dead, and the risk event has occurred. And my wife would be saying, "See, I told you." So what you have to look at is, you do have to look at what's the impact of taking that risk. What's the probability? You can probably look at probability statistics of people that run red lights, although it's probably a pretty high percentage, it seems, these days. But you could probably look at that. That's a manageable piece. But what's the probability of, what's the impact of that probability occurring? So no, I agree with you 100%. That's really why, if I'm at 8% variance, I'm going to start doing risk assessment of the impact if I go to red.
Okay, I'm gonna
Okay,
share
thanks.
the same similar story with you. I'm
Sorry,
in a
just
tornado country.
1 sec. So, excuse me, just a check on the time. We are almost there at the end. No, we will keep it quick, so that others will have they stick to the time. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So we got hit by a tornado, and when the alarm rang, I went to the windows and said, "What is the tornado? Where is the tornado?" Soon as I saw that one, my wife says, "Run." So we started running in our car, and we're heading to the shelter. It so happened that the tornado was going in the same direction to the shelter. So within like 30 seconds, we would meet. But we, as a PMP, and all the risk management that we learned, that stay calm, see which direction it is going first, and then make your decision and move away. So we stopped right before we hit the tornado and moved away. So this kind of relates very much into your agility, risk management, and be aware of predictive. Kind of relates to your baseline. So
Yeah,
thank you
so
for
I
that.
guess what, let me interpret what you just told me. if you're not here by next seminar, I know you didn't outrun the tornado.
No, I did outrun the tornado.
That's
Thanks to
the
you.
problem we don't have to face in Ireland yet, anyway. Thankfully, I'm gonna shoot off there now. Good luck.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, my
thanks.
pleasure. Let's
Thanks, Lee.
make sure that everybody gets the link for the recording. I see a lot
Yeah.
of requests along those lines.
Sure. We are almost towards the end of the webinar now. I would like to take this moment to thank you all for making your time to attend this webinar. I'm sure you got the useful information, implementable actions to take away from this webinar. Remember, you also will get the PDUs for attending this webinar. PDU claim code is shown on the screen. And if you are registered with your PMI ID and then use the same email ID also to log in to this webinar, then we will try to allocate you the PDUs automatically too. Again, thanks a lot for joining this webinar and you have a great rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lee. It was a great talk.